everyone. Welcome back to a very special episode of VG Emporium. This is episode 25, and it's just about maybe 6 months since I've started doing this, so half a year already. And I had originally planned this for episode 20, but decided to give myself more time. So what is this? It's going to be the focus on the Megadrive Sega Genesis chiptune scene of the 2010s, something I was marginally part of. And I'll be featuring 5 artists that were majorly part of it, and that would be Jredd, Cosmo BG, Groovemaster 303, Genie Sokolov, and Dya. And we'll be hearing from all of them today because I actually asked them a series of questions and they sent me recordings, which I will play for you as I introduce them. But there were so many more that were part of the scene that, I might just do a follow-up episode at some point to, focus on their music as well if I can, reach them and ask them if they're okay with me sharing their music. So now this song is called Vault City, and it was a collaboration between Groovemaster 303, Jredd, and Cosmo BG, or Cosmo Buggy at the time. That's going to be kind of like a highlight of this scene, is that just collaboration. There were a bunch of tracks just made that were 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 different people all on the same track, and they kind of choose a central style. So in this case, this is kind of based around Streets of Rage, and then they'd all bring in their own individual sounds, their styles. They kind of go part by part. One guy would do this part, the next would do another one, and then passing it back and forth, and then whoever was kind of initiating the collaboration would kind of help kind of retool everything to kind of fit within that same sound. So yeah, like I said, it's kind of a thing that'll recur, and it'll be showing back up. So now about this track. It is a track from their project FM Possible from 2011, but it is also one of the demo tunes for the program that made this whole scene actually kick off. And that little program was called VGM Music Maker. And what this was is it was a tracker that basically allowed you to create music using the Sega Genesis sound chips, so the YM2612 and the SN76489. And VGM Music Maker was created by a fellow by the name of Alex Semenov, aka Shiru or Shiro 8-Bit. And going by what you would see on his website, shiru.untergrund.net. And from the story that he sent me when I inquired about his creation of the VGM Music Maker, that he's had his hands in so many background scene stuff, as far as NES dev, some SNES dev, 1-bit music, a lot of ZX Spectrum homebrew too. But before I proceed to tell you the story that he had sent me, I wanted to play a piece of his music. I had asked him if he had made something with VGM Music Maker, which he said he had not, but he had made plenty of music using another tracker he had created called TFM Music Maker, which had preceded VGM Music Maker. And I'm going to play it for you right now. It's called Space Standard. You just heard Space Standard by Shiru, made using the TFM Music Maker. And I would tell you about this program, but actually Shiru tells us about it in his unexpected, yet very much appreciated story that he had sent me in response to a set of questions I had asked him. So basically what I had sent him was asking, background as to how he got into making VGM Music Maker, why he created it, and a little bit about himself. And his first response is, this is going to be a convoluted story. So he starts off by saying that he's a game developer from Russia, mostly involved with retro games and games consoles, and the major part of it is the chiptune, both the music and the tools. He started programming his own games back in 1994 with the ZX Spectrum, which was all that was really available to him at the time. And he was doing this from 94 to 2000. And it was sometime in 96 and 97 that he actually started figuring how to compose his own music, because he needed music for his games. So he figured out how to actually program his own music making programs for the ZX. And then in 2001, 2002, he started messing around got his hands on a PC and started making with PC trackers. So HCS, Edlib, and Reality Adlib Tracker, or RAD Tracker, which were all used to create music using the OPL series of 2-op FM sound chips. It was also around this time that he had finally gotten access to the internet through his PCs, and he was actually able to find out that there was a wider ZX Spectrum scene out there that he had known locally. And he discovered that there were actually teams creating ZX Spectrum clones and peripherals, namely the NetOps PC team. And it was through them that he was able to gain access to a thing that they had created called the Turbo Soundboard, which is basically a double AY38910 sound chip mod. And what that chip is 3 channels of PSG, so this gives it 6 channels of PSG. And it was basically just a plug and play. You just take out the original chip out of the chip slot that one in, bam, instant sound expansion. But he does note that this is based off the same kind of mod that was done in 1995, but it wasn't as easily accessible and there wasn't any software made for it. So these guys made it a lot more easy to use. And there was actually software for it, which he actually used to start making music for this double AY chip. So it wouldn't be too long after this that NetOPC team created yet another expansion sound chip for the ZX Spectrum called the Turbo Sound FM. And this was just basically 2 YM2203 sound chips just mashed together. And the YM2203 is, 3 FM sound channels, and it has the YM2149F, which is basically equivalent of the AY chip. And that provided 3 channels of SSG, or pulse generation. And so it was at the same time, about 2007, that he was getting into retro consoles, especially the Sega Genesis Megadrive and the hardware of that. And in his messing around with the hardware and learning about the FM programming of the Sega Genesis, he came to the realization that the configuration of the Turbo Sound FM was mostly compatible with the sound hardware of the Sega Genesis, seeing as the YM2612 was a variant on the YM2203, and 2 YM2203 gives you 6 FM channels, so bam, it's just minus the PCM sampling and the PSG, because the SSG was provided by a different chip than what the Sega Genesis had. So this, in combination with the NetOPC team not really having any, FM synthesis knowledge as being like a ZX Spectrum scene, he set off to create a software to create music for the Turbo Sound FM, thus creating the Turbo FM, or TFM, Music Maker, which is what this track Space Standard was made with. And maybe just a little size tangent on this, you may have noticed that it sounds a little more like something that you'd hear on an ad-lib track, and that is because of his previous experience with the OPL and how he learned how to create FM instruments was with that 2-op FM synthesis. So his patches for this 4-op one are sounding pretty similar, and his style as well, being like that ad-lib demo scene style. But he had a secondary motive for creating this program, and that was to also create music for the Sega Genesis, seeing as this was 6 FM channels that were basically compatible with the YM2612. He could just create music for the Sega Genesis, because at the time, the only other thing that you could make music with was, and this is the first time I'm hearing of it, the MVS Tracker MD, which he says was pretty clunky, or writing an MML and feeding it through a driver. So it was this that he started to interact with other foreign communities, learning some English and getting involved with the Sega Genesis Megadrive dev, as well as a chiptune forum, so 8-bit collective, chip music. And so it was in this that he publicly released TFM Music Maker, and being his first actual public release. And it became pretty popular immediately. And he admits that he wasn't really ready for this. And he was especially unprepared for just the amount of just requests that he would get from people in the community to do updates to this program for weird little things to implement that they ultimately wouldn't end up using, or asking for things to be implemented that were already implemented. They just didn't bother to read the documentation, and it wasn't too clear because of his rough English. But the biggest thing that people kept requesting was the addition of PCM and PSG support for this. So he kept putting it off for about 3 years because he wanted to polish everything else that was already part of the TFM Music Maker. So let's see, this puts us around 2010, 2011. He's just finally decided to create a fork of TFM Music Maker, calling it VGM Music Maker. And it's basically the same architecture of TFM, but with the PSG and the PCM added in, and some of the unrelated features taken out. And thus we got an extremely easy way to create Sega Genesis music with a pretty well put together tracker. And I believe, if I remember, he updated about 2 other times in 2011 that fixed a lot of bugs. It still had some issues, maybe crash every once in a while, but for the most part it was, like I said, pretty well, ran pretty well. The PSG was kind of interesting to work with, but yeah, it worked, and a lot of awesome music was made with it. I mean, that Volt City track that I opened up the show up with, and plus most of the music that I'm going to be sharing with you today is, made using this program. But unfortunately, with a combination of a lot of the drama that was going on with TFM Music Maker, and then, a lot of the stuff that came up, him creating VGM Music Maker between he and Dalek, who was programming and getting ready to release Deflamask at the time, he decided to stop the development on VGM Music Maker totally. And he basically says that it's kind of the best thing that he could have done, because after all this going on, he got involved with NES dev, creating utilities and programs and code for people to create homebrew, and about half of the NES homebrew that's been made in this past 10 years has maybe using some utility, a utility or sound code that he's created. And that is the scene's opinion, not him bragging. He's also had a hand in getting the SNES homebrew scene kind of started as well. And at some point within these 2010s that he was a driving force within the 1-bit music scene. And he feels that he's found his true calling, helping to raise the bars for all these scenes, and to make all these underground things just readily available to the general public. And so there you have it, the pretty dang interesting story of how VGM Music Maker came to be. And so I'd like to thank you, Shiru, if you're listening to this, for all for giving me that story, because that was more than I expected, but fascinating. Now, before I get to talking about the music, this Megadrive music scene proper, we're already 16 minutes in. I'd like to let you know that you can follow Shiru on his on Twitter under Shiru8bit. That's SHIRU 8BIT, where you can actually follow him as he develops something. He's actually currently working on a tracker called Yach * PMS, which is a tracker that he's developing for the MS-DOS. I'm not sure as to what its functionality will be, but it's been pretty interesting just to watch. So now let's get into this proper. I'm going to play a couple songs from you. The first 2 songs actually from the album FM Possible, which featured Jredd, Groovemaster 303, and Cosmo BG. This is Introduction by Jredd, followed by Select Your Fighter by Jredd and Groovemaster 303.
Jredd, Groovemaster 303, and Cosmo BG present FM Possible. Select your button.
So you just heard Introduction by Jredd and Select Your Fighter by Groovemaster 303 and Jredd from FM Possible. And as you can tell, off to a strong start. This album, 37 tracks long, is just a great showcase of what the VGM Music Maker is capable of, and the precursor of what was to come. And I can't remember quite how I came across this. I just saw this link for some awesome FM music of the Sega Genesis variety to Bandcamp, and went there and checked it out and was blown away. And then, like, in the description, they said that all these recordings were made using VGM Music Maker. I was like, wait, what? There's a program you can actually use to make this music? Because for years previous, I had tried to emulate the sound either through Reason, Ableton, even Sunvox, and couldn't quite get that right sound. And I didn't even know what the hell to do with FM synth in the first place. So I looked it up, found it, downloaded it, and bam, off to the races. And it was at this time I also had found SoundCloud and started using it to upload music and listen to music, and started hearing other people using this program. And it was insane. It was crazy. It was like, whoa, people who are doing the same thing as I am, some of them a lot better than I am, that I can aspire to. This is a pretty cool thing. And it's all thanks to these three that, made this album and just opened the floodgates. So without further ado, let's get into this. We're going to start off with Cosmo BG and his track Proud. That was Proud by Cosmo BG from about 2013-2014. And this track almost sounds like Michael Jackson meets Streets of Rage. It's pretty cool. Now, Cosmo BG, I would tell you about him, but actually I'm going to let him speak for himself.
Hey, it's Cosmo Buggy here. I am a FM musician. I also do other types. I use a program called Mod Plug Tracker to do non-FM music and non-chiptune, of course. But my history as a chiptune musician, FM musician, goes back to 2008 when there was this program that came out in 2007 called VGM Music Maker.
A little note here, I believe he's referring to TFM Music Maker.
And it allowed to do FM aspects of Sega Genesis music. I started using it technically in 2007. Well, actually, I downloaded the program, and I started off unsure what the heck to do. I figured out how to play notes in the thing by hitting the keyboard, but to actually get it to make something, I had no clue how to do that. And I made a song based off of a TV show, but it sounded terrible. But then by the time 2008 rolled around, I started to actually try to figure things out and try to look into it a little bit more. I remember learning it by going into the sample modules that came with it, and then looking at it and trying to think, okay, how the heck do they do this? And I would look at things, and I kind of figured out how they did all the effect commands, like the vibrato and the note slide and all that. So I figured out how to do all that, but I started to perfect my sound by 2009. I'd already learned how to rip instruments, so I started off doing that, and that's why it would sound good at the time. It wasn't my brilliant sound design, it was just me ripping other sounds off. So I released this song, I made this song and released it on YouTube, and it was called Rhythm Street, which used Streets of Rage instruments, but the style was based off of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Street Fighter 3 stuff, because I rather like those soundtracks. Even if MVC2 is not fitting for what it is, I still like the music on its own accord. And then I devised this tactic that I would use by taking music that I made in VGMM and then put it into Mod Plug Tracker and then use that so I can have samples along with it. And then I occasionally would have my own PSG by taking square wave sounds from the FM synthesis in VGMM and then put that all together. And I did that. I first released a song called The Groovin' 3, which combines Keep the Groovin' and the Super 3 from Streets of Rage 1, and then I posted that on YouTube, so that's one of the first times I did stuff like that. And then I released another song using that same tactic in November of 2009 called Here It Comes. So that was kind of my debut into the world of posting my FM music over the internet. I was on a website called 8-Bit Collective. And then throughout the early 2010s, I started just posting regular stuff, a lot of stuff that's unfortunately not around anymore. And I would use other styles, but my FM uses that same tactic until in 2011 VGM Music Maker came out. I think Jredd was away on vacation or something for a few days, but when he finally came back, I actually showed him that. Like, I think I made a song and he was like, "How'd you do that?" And then I said, "It finally came out." And he was, of course, overjoyed because he had been mostly doing NES stuff. You know, I couldn't really get him to do FM things because it was limited. And then in late 2011, me, Jredd, and Groovemaster all got together, produced this album called F Impossible. I took a back seat to this one because I wasn't quite as motivated back then, and it has to a lot of it has to do with the fact that my confidence wasn't that high. But I still managed to pump out a few things. And so by the time 2013 rolled around, I started to get a lot more into it. Started to develop a lot more. And I started collaborating with more musicians, like quite a few musicians in that year. So it was a pretty fun year for a lot of that.
So now I'm going to play you another one of Cosmo BG's tracks. This is Everybody Get Down. That was Everybody Get Down by Cosmo BG from about 2015. And again, there's that really strong Streets of Rage sound, really feeling that Koshiro influence. And so now back to Cosmo BG.
Move forward to 2015, they did this 8-man collaboration called 8 Ball, which of course Ray J. KJ here was a part of. And I was honored by the fact that they actually, my contribution to it actually got heavily called back to, including having a guitar sample from a real guitar performed by, I believe, General Offensive. Fast forward to 2017, Cat Skull Electronics put out a Sega Genesis cartridge album of music that I was actually able to be a part of. Trevin Hughes actually sent that one. He actually informed me of that one. He said he's gonna be on it. That's how I get involved with a lot of things. I'm kind of riding off of Trevin's coattails. I can't take but so much credit for myself there on that one. So yeah. And I did a song called Funky Latin Party. And I was happy that they actually included it, but I sometimes wonder if I'm cheating, if I cheated a little bit by doing my string tactic of a layered sounds to get a string stuff. And then in late 2017, I started putting together an album called FM Possible 2, a sequel to the first one, but with more musicians that were involved, along with the original trio. And it finally got released in, I believe, March of 2018. And then a bunch of other collaborations that happened, too. So, there's a lot of other stuff that happened, of course. I did other collaborations with Jredd and, a couple of note in 2016, including a song called Blue City Swag, which I'm quite proud of. To this day, which is one of my most cherished songs that I'm quite proud of. Another one is one of my entries into FM Possible 2 called Clubbin' at the Beach. I was really impressed with that one. I'm still impressed with it. It was my attempt at EDM music, which I'd been trying for a while, but that was when I finally first figured out how to, grasp the sound of that modern EDM style that everyone, was into. And I don't know if it's still as big now, but back then it was, it was it. So yeah, that's my history going. Most of it is in the 2010s. As I said, a couple was in 2008, 2009, but yeah, that's my history.
And that was Cosmo BG, who quite honestly had a pretty big hand in getting this whole scene started. And I know that we really haven't had much contact other than that 8 Ball and then my approaching you about this episode, but just want to thank you for being willing to share your FM story. So now I'm going to play for you the song that he says that he is most proud of, and that is Clubbin' at the Beach from FM Possible 2. That was Clubbin' at the Beach by Cosmo BG from FM Possible 2. And again, just laying really heavy on that Streets of Rage vibe. And like he said, this is some pretty impressive patchwork here. And that kick drum sample is just so punchy. Damn! So now we're going to move on to Jredd. And I'm going to play for you one of the first solo Megadrive chiptunes that he had made, called Silver Dragon. That was Silver Dragon by Jredd. And that was actually a demo tune from the VGM Music Maker. And he, out of the 5 that I'm going to be showcasing today, is the one I've been in most contact with throughout the years, kind of on and off. Actually, back in 2014, I asked him to tell me what he thought of my music that I had made, which was only about 4 tracks at the time. And he gave me some pretty encouraging comments, which not only convinced me to continue on making it, but also got me involved in doing a collaboration with him as well. And this is around the time when I was on my first month of doing my backpacking trip across the country. I was going down the California coast from San Francisco all the way down to San Diego. And this collaboration got initiated probably about shortly after I had gone through Big Sur area and all the way until I was in Los Angeles. And I remember actually, like, I think I was sitting in a Starbucks somewhere like in like East Hollywood or someplace. And, he had showed me like the final like version of it. So yeah, pretty damn cool experience and a pretty damn cool guy. And as a silly side note, I actually saw his name before in Overlooked Remix when he was submitting remixes there. And so I asked him about that and he said, yeah, he's the same guy. So hey, cool little connections. Now before we hear what Jredd has to say, I'm going to play one more of his tracks for you because his responses ended up being about maybe just a couple minutes. So what I'm going to play for you next is Diamond Mines. That was Diamond Mines by Jredd. And yeah, it's not as crazy on the percussion as Silver Dragon was, and it's a lot more mellow, but some really cool showcasing of the periodic noise mode. So now I asked Jredd the same questions, and his response was actually pretty brief compared to some of the other responses I got, and I asked him if he wanted to add more to it, and he said no. So without further ado, here is Jredd.
I got my start as a child with toy keyboards and games like Mario Paint, for example. Then I moved on to the Sega Saturn, and we had a Japanese game called Desmon 2, which would allow you to make different sprites and music tracks. And of course, I used the music editor. After that, I got into Magic's Music Maker and started submitting video game remixes to places like Overclocked Remix. It took me a while, but I eventually got something posted there and was pretty much done with that whole scene. And then I found a place called 8-Bit Collective, and I thought, you know what, I really want to do some chip music. So I started messing with a program called TFM Maker, and that eventually evolved into VGM Music Maker. And I met people like Groovemaster 303 and Cosmo BG, and it feels like the three of us together kind of worked out how to get the most out of the Sega Genesis chip. As far as my influences are concerned, probably the biggest one by far has to be Yuzo Koshiro. I grew up with the Streets of Rage games, and I would spend hours in the sound test and probably play that almost more than I'd play the actual games. Other notable influences include people like David Wise, Donkey Kong Country and Battletoads, and Tim Follin, because I actually grew up and had the game Plock for the Super Nintendo, and we also had Rock and Roll Racing. Both of those games were composed by Tim Follin, and Rock and Roll Racing, even though they had covers of existing rock songs, they were really, really well done, and that's always been a big inspiration to me to push a chip to its limit, I guess. Anyway, hope that answers your question, buddy. Have a good one.
And I actually forgot to ask him which solo track he was most proud of. So I asked him, and this is what he said.
Oh man, favorite track? That's a tough one. I wanted to pick a collaboration with as many people crammed in there as possible, but you insisted I pick a solo track, so, well, let's go with Beyond the Stars. I think that's one of Dya's favorites, and honestly, it's one of mine too. And if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. So, yeah, that's my answer. It'll probably be something different tomorrow.
So there you have it, folks. Straight from the Trevin's mouth. Beyond the Stars it shall be. That was Beyond the Stars by Jredd. And I'm gonna say it, holy shit. This one still blows my mind every time I listen to it, and I still catch just like new things in it every single time as well. And this is pure Jredd through and through, just those like unique melodic leads, all the backing stuff, the crazy percussion, just like that quick chopped percussions, and then like the breakdown, and of course at the very end, that whole just crazy ass fallen explosion that he did. And this was only made in 2014, so only a few years after he had started using VGM Music Maker. So this is insane, just the amount of growth. But he makes just music like back in those times. He was just non-stop music, maybe like a new track a week, and it would just get even more insane with what he was able to do with with some newer programs that would be coming out, which I'll actually be covering after our next segment. Which brings us to our third FM maniac, all the way from the UK, Groovemaster 303, and I'm going to play for you his track, Experimental Techno. That was Experimental Techno by Groovemaster 303. And one thing I can say I really enjoy about his music is his use of the, the sample and note cutoff and delay and retrigger effects, or effect commands, I should say, that like at that low latter end of his track, you'll notice like things are kind of glitching out a little bit. That's what's going on there, and he's used it in a lot of his tracks. I know Jredd started using it a lot, and when they collab, it's all over the place. So now, he was unable to send me a recording of his tale, but he sent it to me in text like Shiro did, so here it is. He starts off saying that he was always a keen gamer, especially with the Sega Megadrive growing up, and he would later on buy other Sega consoles like the Saturn, the Dreamcast, but the Megadrive was always his favorite. Some of his favorite games being Streets of Rage, Sonic, Toe Jam and Earl, Gynog, and the music being a key part of this experience. And he would listen to the sound tests for hours on end because, the music in those games is just incredible. The YM2612, just all the sounds that they were able to pull out of the synthesizer, it was amazing. And he, of course, would record the music onto cassettes through the stereo output of the console into his hi-fi so that he could then listen to it on his Walkman, or Walkman if you prefer. So he goes on to say that he got into learning how to create music at an early age using two keyboards, the Yamaha DJX and the PSR 330. But in the early 2000s, he got a hold of a game called Music for the PlayStation, which would later become, Music 2000 and then MTV Music Generator, which is how he learned how to do song construction and production, which made him eventually want to go out and actually get some nice pieces of kit, such as the Roland MC303 and 505 groove boxes and the Korg Electribes and Yamaha RM1X. So after a few years of learning with the software and hardware, he got his break contributing some remixes to the Streets of Rage remake, which came out in about the mid-2000s, which, if you don't know, was a homebrew game built from the ground up, originally released on the PC and then eventually making its way to the Dreamcast and PSP. He would also go to make music for a homebrew game on the PSP called Calistro and a PC game called Nanotron. Then one day he came across a little program called VGM Music Maker. But unfortunately, up to this point, he had never actually used a music tracking program, and he didn't know how to use it, so he instead would create the patches inside the instrument editors in VGM Music Maker and then export the WAV files of that sound and then import it into Reason and then construct songs that way, and then with the added bonus of being able to actually add percussion to it because VGM Music Maker didn't have like sample playback. And around the same time, he met Jredd online, of course, and they started talking and, sharing tracks back and forth and, learning that, each of them had like different musical styles where, Groovemaster is more like structured, makes a lot of dance beats and techno and stuff. Jredd was more like, improvisational and creating like crazy rock leads and everything. But there was one thing that they had in common musically, and that was the love of the music of the Megadrive / Sega Genesis. So he says that they worked solo throughout most of this time because, Groovemaster still didn't know how to really use a tracker. Trevin was doing his own thing. And then one day, Shiro released VGM Music Maker, which now all the crazy crossover started happening because, Cosmo BG introduced Jredd to VGM Music Maker. Jredd started making the track Volt City, which we came in on the beginning of the episode with. And he eventually shared it with Groovemaster 303 and said, hey, can you add stuff to this? And so they started working on it together back and forth, and Cosmo BG kind of getting in on it. And you get this crazy, just like Streets of Rage style Volt City. And he says part of the reason why his stuff is so Streets of Rage heavy in this Volt City track is because he had just got fresh off of contributing more music to version 5 of Streets of Rage Remake. So he was feeling that Koshiro power. So after this, they experimented with creating more tracks together by so one would start an idea and then pass it off to the other and they would finish it off and vice versa. And, their styles being so different actually somehow just melded together really well to create this really cool, unique sound. And, one's strengths would help balance out the other's weakness. And this all led up to creating a bunch of tracks that would eventually become FM Possible. And they would again bring Cosmo Buggy in to help out with all this. So now it's about time to play you another one of Groovemaster's tracks. It's not going to be from this time period, but we're actually going to circle back here later. But for now, I'm going to play you this song. It's called Stride. You just heard Stride by Groovemaster 303. And he originally made this for a compilation called YM 2017, which was a cart that was made by Cat Skull Electronics that could literally be put inside a Sega Genesis, and it was like music. Like it was just a compilation of all these musics from different people's working with the Sega Genesis sound chips. but unfortunately he had some hardware playback issues with the exported VGM and couldn't quite figure out in time like what the issue was. This is an issue that's faced with VGM Music Maker, unfortunately. So he instead used it for his 800 subscribers special on SoundCloud, and so this would have been about 2016, 2017. So now continuing from where we left off, after FM Possible's release, he began to actually reach out to other people who started using VGM Music Maker to collaborate with, learning all these new little tricks and techniques that he could use in his own songs, and kind of learning how to work around other styles. And then of course he and Jredd would continue to work together and just making tracks, and at their peak they could literally just one would start a track, send it to the other guy, and then about some collaborations it'll take maybe a couple days, maybe even a week to kind of get something back to him. But with these guys, bam, they would make something, send it to the other, 20 minutes later they'd get it back, and they just keep going back and forth like this. They were of the mind to create another album of all these tracks they were working on, but it never came to be, so they just decided to just release them as individual tracks on SoundCloud. So in about 2014, 2015, he was approached by a gentleman by the name of Tullio Adriano from a software company called Watermelon to produce music for a project that was at this point just codenamed Project Y. So he accepted, he brought Jredd in, and they co-composed about 65 to 70 tracks for this game, which would eventually be known as Paprium, which comes with its whole own story, and I'm not going to get into any of everything that went to that. But as far as I can tell you, the music came out awesome, and it was actually made using this custom software. I'd imagine from some of the things that Jredd described on XVGM Radio, actually, talking about Paprium when that game finally got released. It sounded very similar to how VGM Music Maker was laid out, as far as how some of the effects commands were and how some things were, but so not only utilized the Sega Genesis sound chip, but it utilized I don't remember how many different PCM sound channels. So in 2015, shortly after finishing up with Paprium, Groovemaster got back up together with Jredd to create the album FM Radio Underground. So with some solo tracks from each one of them, but a lot of collaboration tracks, and this is showing their strengths together. And after they were done with that, he wanted to pursue making music with other ways. So he started getting more hardware and got more into the core gadget. He would still lend a hand in with the collaborations here and there. One of the big ones actually being 8-Ball, which we've heard mentioned by Jredd and Cosmo BG already. And we'll be getting to that one a little bit later. Suffice to say that, most collaborations were either 2 to 3 people. This was an 8-person collaboration epic. So in the latter years of 2010, he's slowed down in music production, but he's still working on it, making house and acid music, and not really as much as the FM chiptune music. But he did come back to help out, adding a couple tracks to FM Possible too. So he ends this off by saying that Jredd is one of his greatest friends. Even though there's half a globe separating them, it still doesn't stop that from happening. Just the sheer amount of music they've created together and worked on, I can imagine the bond that helps create. So yes, life keeps happening and all these life distractions keep happening up. Jredd, if you're listening to this, he says that he'll always have time for you and that he's always up for a talk. And I imagine it's vice versa as well. So now we'll end his segment off with his personal favorite track. And this brings us back to FM Possible again. And so this is called Bonus Stage Extended by Groovemaster 303. That was Bonus Stage Extended by Groovemaster 303 from FM Possible. And what he says about this is that I remember creating this melody for this while I was out and about. I just had this riff in my head and I needed to get it down in some form. It's only a short loop, but I think it captures the very essence of what made the YM2612 special and unique. And I kind of agree with this because, even though there's this possibility to make these crazy, highly technical tracks, the YM2612 was made for making video game music, basically, and, sometimes it's just good to be like a simple melody with some, like a nice bouncy bass and, like some melodic stuff going on in the background. Yeah, that's the essence right there. So now, before we get into our next two, musicians, I want to actually introduce another program that came into play in about 2015, and that would be Deflamask. So the timeline goes about 2011, Shiru comes out with VGM Music Maker, but at the same time, a fellow by the name of Dalek is creating Deflamask, which was released around the same time as well, though it had rudimentary kind of, the YM2612 emulation on it, but its main focus was another FM sound chip called the YMU759, I believe, and it was heavily used in a lot of mobile phones, and I believe it was up to 16 channels of 2 operators FM synthesis. It wouldn't be until about 2015 that the Megadrive, actual emulation on the Deflamask was fully realized, and people started migrating from VGM Music Maker, which, had been updated since 2011 and had, some issues with it, to Deflamask, which, like I said, had a lot more realized features. So our next two featured musicians got started in the scene around this time, and they bring their own wholly unique styles. So to start, I'll introduce you to Dya, or Dya, not sure how to pronounce it, but with his track Chora from his debut album Neon Dreams. That was Chora by Dya from his debut album Neon Dreams. And I remember the first time hearing this, I was like, whoa, what is this sound? Because up to this point, a lot of people were starting to make music with the VGM Music Maker and figure out how to rip the patches straight from Sega Genesis games. So there were a lot of tracks being made with those patches, not very much altered, or actually recreating, songs that were in those styles of the tracks with those patches. But Dya comes in strong with these custom sounding patches, except for that bass tone, sounds a lot like something that Jredd has used before, I think. And his story kind of tells a little bit about that. But like Groovemaster 303, he was only able to send me text. So, hey, you get to hear my lovely voice a little bit more. So he begins by saying, like many kids born in the 80s, he loved video games. And he grew up in a big family, so his parents would buy all the latest systems, so NES, Sega Genesis, SNES, all for him and his siblings to play. And he just so happened to be one of those lucky kids that was fascinated by the music coming from these games he was playing and tried to recreate them by humming them or playing them on the piano. And he says that he's always been writing music on said piano. But it wouldn't be until 2002 when he got his own PC that he would actually start trying to make chiptune music. At this point, he was very much into Amiga mod tunes and Cracktro, or also known as keygen music. So at this time, the only real way to write authentic chiptune was to either write an MML format, music macro language, which was a music programming language, which he did not have much programming knowledge at all, or trackers, which was not, would only be like sample based, so he'd be able to sample the sounds that he wanted and then use them in that way. So this would be like, Pro Tracker, Impulse Tracker, whatever trackers were available at that time. So now he fast forwards his story to 2012 when two programs, Fami Tracker and LSDJ, were more fully realized to the point where, it was like to his satisfaction to create chiptunes for both the NES and the Game Boy. But deep down, he was really wanting to make music for the Sega Genesis / Megadrive, and there wasn't really any tools that he knew of to do this. That wasn't until he saw a video that Jredd had posted of himself using VGM Music Maker, and he was like, oh, I gotta get in touch with this guy and figure out what he's doing here. And thus will begin his journey into FM chiptunes. But before we get into that, I'm gonna play you another one of his tracks. This is Shower Fresh from FM Possible 2. That you just heard, my friends, was Shower Fresh by Dya from FM Possible 2. And again, here he is just pushing the limits of what this sound chip is capable of. Whereas Chora was made with VGM Music Maker after learning a lot of things from Jredd, this was made using Deflomask in about 2018 using like version 0.12.0, I think. So yeah, pretty big difference in this time frame. So now, continuing on from our story. Dya contacted Jredd about VGM Music Maker, and being the humble virtuoso FM madman that he is, he took him under his wing and taught him what he knew. He says that Jredd saw his potential in him already and encouraged him to go beyond what he, saw in himself. And of course, hanging out with Jredd eventually leads to collaborations with the likes of Groovemaster 303, Cosmo BG, and Tony Lees. So he would continue to collaborate with them and then go on to collaborate with many others until he decided to strike out on his own when Deflamask came out with the, in 2015 version that had the more fully realized emulation of the YM2612 sound chip. So now he's gone on to contribute heavily to Battle of the Bits, to demo scene stuff, and also started this series of albums called Chiptunes for Autism. And it's actually where a version of one of his favorite songs that he's made is from, or more specifically from Volume 5. This is Diagonals, which was originally started as a song for a demo created for the TI-994A, which is a Texas Instruments microcomputer. And this is called Diagonals S-Gen Mix. And that you just heard was Diagonals S-Gen Mix by Dya, made for the Chiptunes for Autism Volume 5 Sensory Fire. And, I could totally imagine if I didn't know this was made using those sound chips of the Sega Genesis, I'd be kind of hard pressed to even say this was like FM because the tones that he's using are just so like different compared to other things I've heard made using the sound chips. And the really cool thing about this is that he's using it to more enhance the SN76489's sound. So like that main kind of crunchy lead sound you're hearing in there, that is the again the periodic noise being used to like amazing effect. So yes, that's Dya bringing some of his knowledge from being obsessed with the demo scene to this chiptune scene. And now that brings us to our final chiptunist in this showcase, and that is Genie Sokolov, and I'm going to play for you her track, Venus Landing. You just heard Venus Landing by Genie Sokolov. and it is actually a track in her debut EP, Beijing Yingyue 1, which is Chinese for background music 1. And going off from what she said in her recording, which I'm going to be playing for you soon, this is probably about like her third track that she's made using the Deflamask, and damn. So now, as I said, she was able to send a recording into me, so I'm going to play it for you right now.
Hello. So, my name is Adelaide. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and you know me as the chiptune artist, game Genie Sokolov. Hello, everybody. So, how I started doing chiptune. First of all, I'm a Canadian citizen, but I was born in France in the mid-80s. So, the coolest gaming platform at the time was Sega. I had a Sega Game Gear at home, and one of the first console I ever played was the Sega Master System, which was hugely popular in Europe. And one of the first gaming console I fell in love with at the time was the Sega Genesis, called the Sega Megadrive over there. I loved it for many reasons. First of all, the game. There was Sonic the Hedgehog, Shinobi, and the Disney's game like Aladdin or Lion King. Those were really cool. But something that was really attractive at the time was the sound. First of all, it was my very first stereo console. And the way to listen to the stereo output of the console was because on the Sega Genesis you have a headphone output at the front and volume control, so you can plug in some headphones on it and listen to the games. That was really a revolution at the time. So I loved listening to game music this way. One thing that was interesting was that I learned how to access the sound test of the different games blindly, because sometimes the TV was off or somebody else was using it, because we were a family of 6, including my parents. And so, I learned how to just listen to the music and enjoy it. That was my thing, and this is how I started getting in love with the Sega Genesis sound. And something that was interesting about it was that console had a similar sound chip, albeit simplified of course, of one of the most popular one that we could hear in synthesizer from the mid-80s and early 90s, namely the Yamaha DX7. I really loved it because you could listen to it on the radio at the time on tracks from Prince, Madonna, Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, anybody, you name it, it was on there. So it was very surprising sometimes to hear bassline in some of my games that was very reminiscent of what I could hear on the radio at the time. Or sometimes Eurodance too, so namely the Street of Rage game, Gunstar Heroes, Sonic 3D, you can hear huge bassline straight out of radio. That was amazing. Even the Super NES couldn't do that for obvious reason. So then I don't know, sometime in the late 2010s, at the time I was a software developer, still am, and I don't know, I decided, why can't I try to make chiptune myself just for fun? I was listening to people that were already in the scene, like Jredd, Dya, Groovemaster 303, and so on and so on, that were just amazing. I could listen for hours to what they did on FM synth, especially the Sega Genesis console, and I was amazed. So I decided, you know what, can I try? Maybe I can program a little, maybe I can try something. So one of the first track I did for just for sound testing was called a Pyramid Zone. And I decided to upload it on SoundCloud just for fun. And I didn't have an artist name, so I had to think of it for just, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. I mean, there was a Game Genie cheating cartridge on my desk at the time, and a book from a French author called Serge Gainsbourg called Genie Sokolov. And I decided, Game Genie, Evgeny is the same, so Game Genie Sokolov it will be, and so this is how it was named. And I uploaded it on SoundCloud. Then I reached out to some chiptune Facebook community at the time, also to a couple of curators, like DJ Cutman for his show This Week in Chiptune, a couple of blogs, to say, hey, I've done that, and I'm very new, and I want to have some impression of it. And the reaction was good. I mean, some people told me, hey, you should do another track, try doing something else. So I did another one, and it was called a Down Under Zone. was way more complicated to do because still I was straight on the stock Sega Genesis sound, no delay, no EQ, nothing, pure sound. So it was uploaded, same, I had good result. And then after 4 tracks released this way, I just decided, let's group them all together and let's make an EP of those 4 tracks.
Now I'm going to take this moment to play you another one of her tracks. It's actually not from the EP that she just mentioned. The song Venus Landing is actually from that, but the next track I'm going to play for you is from her first LP, Insert Disc 2, and it is called Rev Zone. That was Rev Zone from Insert Disc 2 by Genie Sokolov. And I'll say the growth between this and the EP is just crazy. Because if you go back and listen to that EP, you can hear a little bit of that Jredd DNA in there. Venus Landing, not so much, because, by that, I think that's like probably her 3rd or 4th track done in that one. But in this, it's pretty much gone, and it's all her, just own style in there, and it's really cool. And one of the nice little touches I noticed is the snare sample that she's using here is I think the same from Venus Landing. It's just at a higher sample rate, sounding a little cleaner, a little more high pitched. And one last little note is that the use of using the PSG as leads, is something I really like to hear in Sega Genesis chiptunes, just Sega Genesis music in general. But enough of my rambling. Here's Game Genie Sokolov once more.
So I got them mastered, and then the first EP called Beijing was released on the internet, and suddenly had a good sound, had good reviews for people in the chiptune community, which was very surprising for me. And so that was it. So my inspiration was always, the Sega Genesis sound and its bass. That was always my thing. I love the bass. One thing I don't like about the console, to be honest, is the sample playback capabilities. Well, it's 8-bit, but it's quite limited, distorted, and there's quite a lot of noise. It's very complicated to get clean sound out of it. Most of the time you don't. So you do what you can. This is really what you do. You do what you can with it. So at the end of the 2010s, I was making 4 more tracks, namely I think one was called Blue Level, Rev Zone, Beyond IO, stuff like this. Suddenly somebody from the job I was doing told me, hey, I know somebody who's head of a label, maybe would be interested because he's looking for people making video game music at the time because he wanted to do an experiment. It was the Lisbon Lux label, which was very surprising because they were doing pop records. And one of the artists was called Das Mortal. It's very, very good. It's very nice. I encourage everybody to listen to it. And the head of the label wanted to diversify its assets. So he met me and he said, okay, can you make a full-length album? So yeah, so I make, I think, 8 to 10 tracks. And he decided to release it and to create an image for me. That was the album called Insert Disc 2. And that was surprising because he wanted to do a photo shoot, he wanted to do some promos, organize some concert for me, and there was some press talking about it. This was so surprising. I wasn't aware that you could get on a label, a regular music label for that kind of music. So of course it didn't sell the numbers that were expected of any artist like me, which was not a surprise for anyone. So we didn't renew for another album. Which is okay. I'm really thankful and really grateful for the opportunity I got at the time. It was very nice of them, and I'll always thank them. Because of course, from an economic perspective, it was a bit flawed to use my music. That's a very niche thing, especially in the chiptune community. Most of it are using the Game Boys. I'm using Sega Genesis, which is not something a lot of people are using, which is a shame. It has a very good sound and a lot of possibilities. I love it. Otherwise, and then I started making new tracks, but that's for another story because that's the end of the 2010s, and I'm Game Genie Sokolov, and wish you a good day. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story. And what she also shared with me was her favorite track that she's made, or I should say tracks. One of them being Venus Landing, which I already played, bringing her in, and the other one being Beyond IO, which is actually one of my personal favorites of her pure Sega Genesis chiptune music, which is actually what I'm going to play you right now. This is Beyond IO by Game Genie Sokolov. That was Beyond I.O. by Genie Sokolov from her LP Insert Disc 2, which she also contributed to FM Possible 2, along with Rev Zone. And I'll honestly admit that, I actually got chills when I first heard this track, because, I know, again, it's just that use of the PSG as the lead. That bass is just so good, and you can tell that she eschewed the using the sampled percussion in place of using FM percussion, which, makes it a lot more stronger. And you can actually hear it in this, her beginning to move towards more of like a synthwave style, which is actually what her music from the last 2 years has been. It's just kind of like a mix of synthwave, chiptune, and even city pop with the single that she did called Love in the Mirror in collaboration with Tobo Gigao, who is another one of my favorite chiptunists and whose music I will be playing on this show eventually. So getting back on the rails here, I would highly recommend you go check out Genie Sokolov's music, not just the Sega Genesis chiptune stuff, but all her more recent music, like synthwave stuff as well, because it's all really good. And I'm going to be linking her Bandcamp on the show notes, as well as everybody else's, respective sites on the show notes. So for Genie Sokolov, Groovemaster 303, and Dya, they're still making music. For Dya, he's still doing chiptune stuff. For Genie and Groovemaster, they're kind of branching out from that. And then Jredd and Cosmo, they've kind of, haven't been making too much stuff, but I've linked their SoundClouds, because, all their, like I said, just check out all their musics. It's just really good, and seeing the evolution of the beginning. So back in 2011, starting with FM Possible, which I'm also going to link in the show notes, and then just coming all the way up to 2018 with FM Possible 2, with everybody just joining in there with their fucking best. Excuse the language, but it's like I said, this I kind of got to see this all grow. I didn't really get to participate too much. I made a few tracks here and there, maybe total of maybe 20 tracks within the span of 8 years. And also, I didn't really feel too sure of myself through that time, because, I know Jredd, reached out to me, and I actually collaborated on a few things. One of the tracks we'll be getting to soon. And, I know I tried to initiate a few more times, and I just kind of didn't fall through, because I just didn't feel I was at their level, and I didn't feel deserved to be, working with them, or doing all this stuff, and all that self-doubting stuff, which I'm kind of done with right now. I'm actually done with, thankfully. So yes, this brings us into our last section, collaborations, which was a big part of this whole scene, with Jredd being the actual spearhead behind most of it. I mean, there's just so many tracks, like Groovemaster 303 featuring Jredd, Jredd featuring Groovemaster 303, Cosmo BG featuring MB Tech, featuring The Dead, featuring the General Offensive, Genie Sokolov featuring Dya, things things like that, and it'd be it was just crazy to see all this going on, everybody's solo stuff, everybody's collaborative stuff, and there was I think I want to say it was in 2014 or 2015 that Jredd came up with this mad idea, and you've heard mentioned it a few times already, called 8-Ball. Well, it wasn't called 8-Ball at the time, but he just approached all these people, said, hey, let's just work on this track. So I'll, he started something, sent it to Cosmo, sent it to Groovemaster, eventually sent it to me, and I contributed something to it, sent it to, just a few other people's, and eventually just became this crazy combination of just all these different styles, and of course Jredd and Groovemaster kind of got it all kind of pieced, worked together to be kind of almost a cohesive piece, but still very individualistic. You could tell whose parts were whose. But yeah, that's what I'm going to play for you next, is 8-Ball by FM Possible Turbo, which consisted of Jredd, Groovemaster 303, Tony Lees, MB Tech, Rage Cage, Rob Uga or Rob 2612, Cosmo BG, and General Offensive. That big ol' hunka chunka track you just heard was 8 Ball by FM Possible Turbo, featuring Jredd, Groovemaster 303, Tony Lees, MB Tech, Rage Cage, Robuga and or Rob 2612, Cosmo BG, and General Offensive. Made entirely in VGM Music Maker and submitted and featured in the Chiptunes equals Win Volume 4. And yeah, I remember when Jredd, sent me a message saying, hey, do you want to be part of this collaboration that I'm doing with a few other guys? And I was like, yeah, okay, send me over what you got. And then he sent me this thing, and it's this really groovy sounding cool thing, and I'm trying to think, what can I add to this? What can I add to this? And I tried throwing a bunch of different ideas at it, and finally what landed, well, suffice to say, one of these things is not like the others. And yeah, so what I submitted was kind of like this rinky-dink little tune. And so I gave it back to Jredd, and a couple of days, a day goes by, and then he sends it back to me, and holy crap, how he said that both he and Groovemaster 303 kind of doctored up, and they really made it work. Though it does still stick out like a sore thumb. And then how they transitioned out of it just worked, was just really awesome. And then everybody else's parts after that is just blew my mind what they were doing. And the version that you're hearing now is there's been multiple patch changes, kind of the speed of the track and everything. It's just all building up to this awesome, just amazing ensemble madness. And, I personally feel like this was a pretty good send-off for VGM Music Maker, because by this point everybody was starting to transition over to Deflamask. But maybe I should say mostly everybody, because I personally was still using it up to 2018, 2019, and I'd imagine some other people were still using it because of just the familiarity of it. So now we're coming up to the next collaboration track, which is this one. I just can't come up with the right words to really describe it or do it justice, so I'm just gonna introduce it to you. It's called FM Rangers Fusion Force X by the FM Rangers, which are Genie Sokolov, Jredd, The Dead, Dya, and Cosmo BG.
Fusion Force X.
That there you just heard? That was that awesome, mind-melting FM goodness, Mach 5 Fusion Force X by the FM Rangers, made up of Genie Sokolov, Jredd, The Dead, Dya, and Cosmo BG. And I remember them hyping this up, like sharing little previews of it, making like little announcements of it and everything, and just and when the track finally dropped, it was just like, holy shit. And that's still all I can really say. I can't really think of the right words to say about this. It's like, still this is 3 years later and it's still blowing me away. I'm hearing new little things every single time. And I have it on good authority, that being Jredd, that this was, in his words, Genie Sokolov's baby. That, she was the one who spearheaded it, got everybody to get into it, put it all together, fit everything together, mixed it. Kind of crazy to figure out that she did all this with everybody kind of doing different ways of doing it, VGM Music Maker, Deflamask, and Dya using probably either Genie or FM Drive VST by Ali James. So yeah, in short, this is an absolute masterwork, just showing the sheer passion that everybody had for this sound of the Sega Megadrive, just that YM2612, the SN76489, just working those all together and just creating these awesome sounds that you could never imagine actually hearing coming out of the console, but very well can be played through said console. The full force of these chips just being realized without worrying about the restrictions of memory limitations. And I would say this is a really damn good way to end a decade of this scene. What with Jredd and Cosmo BG being a couple of the guys that helped get the scene started off, and then Dya and Genie Sokolov, who came in about halfway through, and just really pushing the boundaries of what the chip could do. And then of course The Dead, who wasn't mentioned throughout this show, but he started around the same time that Genie and Dya started as well. And his style is of course kind of this crazy dubstep, just bass, warbly, all over the place sound. And actually this is a good time to actually name off some of the other folks that were part of this scene, because it wasn't just limited to these 5 I mentioned this in this show. So start off, we got The Dead, and then of course Rob2612, MB Tech, Tony Lees, Ali James, who went on to co-create the FM Drive and the Super PSG VSTs, General Offensive, and Drexigar. And these are just the ones that I can remember off the top of my head. But there's still so many more that got caught with that YM2612 bug. And just so much awesome original Sega Genesis Megadrive chiptunes just got made throughout those 10 years. And it's actually just going stronger and stronger into 2020. In part in due because of the pandemic and everybody being quarantined and restricted to just being at home. Some folks, they just found this little program called Deflamask and just started figuring it out and making music. And there's just so much awesome, just amazing chip music just being made now with this thing. Some of these, some of them kids, in their teens, and they're just making these awesome, just covers or remixes, or just using the patches and just making these awesome things, and then finally branching out into their own, making their own original stuff, and it's just insane. But we'll get more into that another day. For now, I will say thank you to Jredd, Cosmo BG, Groovemaster 303, Genie Sokolov, Dya, and Shiru for just sharing their stories with me and allowing me to actually share it with all of you. Talking about their histories with FM music, their inspirations, how they got into it, just the building up of all this amazing stuff, and if you were there and got to see it all, how amazing it was just to hear it all happening. And hopefully if you're getting new into this Sega Genesis Megadrive Chiptune Scene, listening to it, actually making stuff, and contributing to it, hopefully this is a nice introduction for you. And I'll definitely be coming back to this eventually, I'll be doing an episode featuring music of others that were, contributed throughout that past decade of the 2010s, and even get into the stuff that's been made in these last 3 years in the 2020s. So now it's about the time I'm gonna start winding the show down, and I'm just gonna remind you that you can check everybody's stuff out. I'm gonna be linking everybody's sites to the show notes, their respective SoundClouds, Bandcamps, their personal sites, just so you can go check them out. And I would highly encourage you to go do so. And and then as far as where you can find this little show, You can find it on all your favorite podcatchers, Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon, Audible, and then, of course, whatever things catch from all those. And then you can find it on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and then as well, you can find me, Rage Cage, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as on SoundCloud, where you can find all the stuff I've made in those past 10 years, from 2012 all the way up to now. And so now, as to what I'm going to be doing next, I think I'm going to be taking a little break and actually let a couple of my curators and / employees, still not sure what to call them, host the next episode or two. So yeah, who it's going to be, I'm still going to figure it out, who I'm going to schedule for that. So it's going to be a surprise. Now, I think it might be a little appropriate, seeing as I started this whole episode off with one of the first tracks that Jredd, Groovemaster, and Cosmo BG made, using VGM Music Maker, that I closed the show out with one of the first tracks I actually made with VGM Music Maker, successfully all the way through, and actually, said, okay, this is good. And it's actually one of the first tracks I successfully finished using a tracker. Haha! So yeah, this is going to be Chill Stroll, made by yours truly, Rage Cage, using VGM Music Maker. So, hope you all enjoyed this episode, and see you in a couple weeks.